He loves Evertonian people. He loves Liverpool. He loved it when he lived down there, and at Goodison he talks about it non-stop.
Ask an Everton supporter about Alex Young and watch what happens. The eyes light up, the smile appears. The stories begin. They will tell you about the Golden Vision, a footballer they never forgot. Then ask a younger football fan. Many won't know who he was. And that is the mystery. Because Alex Young was not a fringe player. He was not a forgotten substitute. He won league titles. He won the FA Cup. He became a Hearts hero. He became one of Everton's most loved players. He inspired one of football's most beautiful nicknames. Yet somehow, one of the finest footballers of his generation slipped into the shadows. How does that happen? How does a player loved by thousands become known by so few? The answer is simple. Football remembers noise. Football remembers headlines. Football remembers endless television clips. But Alex Young belonged to a different age. An age when greatness lived in memories. Not algorithms, not highlight reels. The people who watched Alex Young never forgot him. The problem is that football history did. Somewhere between the old game and the modern game, one of football's greatest artists was left behind. A Hearts hero, an Everton champion, a footballer called the Golden Vision, and perhaps the most underrated legend in football history. So how did it happen? How did a player loved by an entire city slowly disappear from football's biggest conversations? That is the story of Alex Young, and it deserves to be remembered. If you enjoy remembering football's forgotten giants, subscribe now, because some legends deserve another chance to be seen. Long before Everton supporters called him the Golden Vision, Alex Young was a young boy growing up in Loanhead, a mining town near Edinburgh. It was a place built on hard work, a place where nothing came easily. And like many boys of his generation, football became both a passion and a way forward. Young was never a natural showman. He was quiet, humble, the kind of person who preferred actions to words. After making his name with Newton Grange Star, he earned a move to Heart of Midlothian. That was where his rise truly began. Almost immediately, Hearts supporters realised they had something special. Young was not the biggest player. He was not the strongest. But he saw the game differently. He moved differently. There was a smoothness to everything he did. A calmness that made difficult things look easy. The success soon followed. He helped Hearts win the Scottish Cup in 1956. Then the league title in 1957-58. Then another league championship in 1959-60. By the time his Hearts career was over, he had scored more than 100 goals and become one of the most admired forwards in Scottish football. But what truly made him stand out was not just the goals, it was the way he played. The intelligence, the balance, the elegance. Supporters did not simply remember what Alex Young achieved. They remembered how he made them feel. By 1960, word of his talent had travelled far beyond Scotland. Everton were watching closely, and they knew they were not signing potential. They were signing a proven winner. A footballer already loved by Hearts supporters. A footballer already capable of changing matches. What nobody knew then was that the next chapter would make him immortal, because Goodison Park was about to fall in love with Alex Young. In the summer of 1960, Alex Young left Scotland and crossed the border to join Everton. It was a big move, a new city, a new league, a new level of expectation. Everton were rebuilding under Harry Catterick, a manager determined to return the club to the top of English football. And he believed Alex Young could help get them there. But the beginning was not perfect. Young arrived, carrying the pressure of a major transfer fee. He was entering a tougher, faster league. And almost immediately, physical problems began to follow him. Injuries interrupted his progress. Pain became a regular companion. Behind the scenes, his feet were often in terrible condition. Years later, his wife Nancy would recall how he sometimes had to arrive hours early for treatment, with blisters so severe that simply getting ready to play could become an ordeal. Yet every time he stepped onto the pitch, supporters saw something different. They saw grace. They saw intelligence. They saw a player who never seemed rushed. While others battled through matches, Young appeared to drift through them, always calm, always balanced, always one step ahead. At first, Everton supporters were still learning about him. But slowly, week by week, something began to happen. Goodison Park started falling in love. Not because Alex Young demanded attention, not because he filled newspaper headlines, but because he possessed that rare quality every supporter recognises when they see it. Class, the kind that cannot be coached, the kind that cannot be manufactured, The kind that makes a crowded stadium rise from its seats before anything has even happened. By the early 1960s, Everton knew they had signed far more than a goal scorer. They had signed an artist. And soon, the rest of English football would discover it too. By the time the 1962-63 season arrived, Alex Young was no longer the new signing from Scotland. He had become one of Everton's most important players. And this was the season everything came together. Everton were building something special under Harry Catterick. A team filled with quality. A team filled with belief. And right at the heart of it stood Alex Young. Alongside players like Roy Vernon, he helped drive Everton towards the First Division title. The goals arrived, the performances improved, and week after week, Goodison Park grew more certain that they were watching a very special footballer. Young scored 22 league goals during the title-winning campaign. Only Vernon scored more. But numbers alone never explained why supporters loved him. It was the way he played, the way he seemed to glide across the pitch, the way he could create space where none appeared to exist, the way difficult moments looked effortless when the ball reached his feet. This was the season when the nickname truly took hold, the Golden Vision. It was a nickname that captured something statistics never could. Because Alex Young was not simply helping Everton win football matches. He was giving supporters memories, moments, feeling, the kind that survive long after trophies have gathered dust. When Everton secured the league title, the club had officially returned to the top of English football, and Alex Young had become one of the faces of that success. Not the loudest, not the most famous, but perhaps the most loved. For Everton supporters, he was no longer just a brilliant footballer from Scotland. He had become something much bigger. He had become the Golden Vision. League champions or not, Everton wanted more, and Alex Young wanted more too. The next great moment arrived in 1966. Everton reached the FA Cup final at Wembley against Sheffield Wednesday. It remains one of the most famous finals in the club's history. At one stage, Everton found themselves 2-0 down. Many teams would have collapsed. This one did not. Led by belief, determination, and the quality running through the side, Everton produced a remarkable comeback. 3 unanswered goals, a 3-2 victory, and the FA Cup was heading back to Goodison Park. Alex Young played his part in that triumph. He was there on one of the greatest days Everton supporters had ever experienced. Another major trophy, another chapter added to his growing legacy. But something else was happening too. By the mid-1960s, Alex Young had become more than a footballer. He had become part of Everton culture, part of Everton identity, part of Everton folklore. Supporters did not simply admire him, they adored him. That love reached such a level that in 1968, renowned filmmaker Ken Loach released a BBC television drama called The Golden Vision. Think about that for a moment. How many footballers have inspired an entire television drama built around the connection between a player and his supporters? Very few, because this was never just about goals. It was never just about trophies. It was about what Alex Young meant to people. To many Evertonians, he represented everything they loved about football. Skill, grace, imagination, joy. The Golden Vision was no longer just a nickname. It had become a symbol. A symbol of a footballer who made supporters believe they were watching something special every time he stepped onto the pitch. And that is why, decades later, people still talk about him. Not simply as a winner, but as a memory, a feeling, a piece of Everton's soul. For Everton supporters, Alex Young was a star. For Heart supporters, he was already a hero. But when it came to Scotland, the story feels very different. Considering everything he achieved, his international career was surprisingly short. Just 8 caps, 5 goals. That was all. Even today, those numbers seem difficult to understand. Here was a player who had won major honours in Scotland. A player who had become a champion in England. A player admired for his intelligence, creativity and goals. Yet Scotland never fully embraced him. There was no great scandal, no dramatic falling out. Scottish football simply had an extraordinary number of talented forwards during that era. Competition for places was fierce, opportunities were limited, and somehow Alex Young became one of the players left on the outside looking in. For many supporters, that remains one of the biggest mysteries of his career. How could a footballer so admired at club level receive so few opportunities for his country? Perhaps it was timing, perhaps it was selection preferences, perhaps it was simply bad luck. Whatever the reason, Scotland never saw the full Alex Young story. Everton did, Hearts did. But Scotland only saw flashes, and that is why his international record remains one of the strongest arguments for his place among football's most underrated figures. Because when people discuss the great Scottish forwards of that generation, Alex Young's name should appear far more often than it does. He had the talent, he had the achievements, he had the respect of those who watched him. Yet somehow, he never received the recognition his ability deserved. And sadly, that pattern would continue later in his career. Because while supporters still loved the Golden Vision, difficult days were beginning to appear on the horizon. Football can be cruel. One day you are the hero. The next, people are already talking about the future. For Alex Young, the late 1960s became increasingly difficult. His body was no longer helping him the way it once had. Injuries continued to appear. Pain became harder to ignore. Years of football had taken their toll. There were knee problems, physical struggles, and challenges that supporters rarely saw from the stands. Young later spoke about losing part of his hearing during his career, making communication on the pitch more difficult than many realised. Yet he continued playing, continued fighting, continued giving everything he could. At the same time, his relationship with manager Harry Catterick was becoming increasingly strained. According to both Alex and his wife Nancy, the relationship was never an easy one. As younger players emerged, Young gradually found himself pushed further away from the centre of Everton's plans. One of those young players was Joe Royle, a teenager with enormous potential, a player who represented Everton's future. For supporters, however, that transition was painful, because they were not watching an ordinary player being replaced. They were watching the Golden Vision move closer to the exit. Many fans struggled to accept it. Some reacted with anger, others with disappointment, but most simply felt sadness. They knew what Alex Young had given to Everton. They knew what he meant to the club, and they were not ready to let him go. The manager may have been looking towards the future. The supporters were still looking at Alex Young, and for the first time in years, it was becoming clear that love alone could not stop time from moving forward. If there was one moment that summed up the final chapter of Alex Young's Everton career, it came in 1968. Everton had reached another FA Cup final. For most players, it would have been a day of glory. For Young, it became one of the biggest disappointments of his career. He was left out. According to his wife Nancy, he was devastated. A player who had helped Everton reach the top suddenly found himself watching from the side. The supporters still loved him, but football was moving on. And football rarely waits for anyone. Soon after, Young left Goodison Park, the place where he had become the Golden Vision. His career continued with Glentoran and later Stockport County, but injuries and knee problems were becoming harder to overcome. Away from football, there was a different side to Alex Young, a quieter side. Long before the fame, he had met Nancy at a dance hall in Scotland. Together they built a family and raised their children, Jane, Alex and Jason. Unlike many footballers, Young never chased attention. He remained humble, private, grounded. One of his great passions away from football was horse racing, and for a period he even shared ownership of a racehorse called Daxol. Eventually, injury and arthritis brought his playing days to an end. No grand farewell, no endless headlines, just the quiet exit of a man who had given everything to the game. And perhaps that was fitting, because Alex Young never lived for fame. He lived for football, for family, and for the simple joy of playing the game beautifully. Yet for Everton supporters, he was far more than a former player. He was part of their history, part of their memories. So why did Alex Young become so underrated? Not because he lacked greatness, but because he arrived too early. Football today is built on exposure, highlights, clips, interviews, endless reminders of who was great. Alex Young belonged to a different world, a world where greatness survived through memory, and memory fades. That is the cruel reality. The people who saw Alex Young play never needed convincing. They knew what they had witnessed. They saw the elegance, the intelligence, the moments that made him different. But every year, there were fewer of those people left to tell the story. And slowly, one of football's finest artists slipped further into the background. Not forgotten by Everton, not forgotten by Hearts. Forgotten by the generations that never saw him. Perhaps that is why his nickname remains so powerful. The Golden Vision. Not a nickname built on statistics. Not a nickname built on controversy. A nickname built on feeling, on admiration, on the belief that supporters were watching something special. Very few footballers leave that behind. That is why, nearly 60 years later, older supporters still speak about Alex Young with such affection. Because they are not remembering a record, they are remembering an experience. Maybe that is the final answer. Alex Young became underrated because football struggled to preserve the kind of greatness he represented. Quiet greatness, elegant greatness, timeless greatness. The kind that cannot always be measured, only remembered. And for those who saw him, the golden vision was unforgettable. Football history simply failed to keep up with him. Subscribe now, because every time we remember a legend like Alex Young, a piece of football history stays alive.